There are stories that the soil itself refuses to forget, stories that linger beneath roots and rivers, waiting for the right kind of darkness to rise again. In the pine-choked fields of Yazoo County, Mississippi, there was once such a story, one that mothers whispered to restless children when thunder rolled and lamps flickered. They said that on some nights, if you stand by the old cotton barn after sundown, you can hear crying not the cry of a woman nor of a child, but something between the two. They said it's the sound of a boy who lost everything in one single night and made the earth itself promise revenge. His name was Josiah. He was small for his age, quick with his hands, and quiet as a shadow. The overseer called him Mouse. Not knowing how close he was to the truth, Josiah had learned early to survive by staying unseen. But there are nights when even shadows are forced into the light, and on one such night, when the fireflies glowed over the cane fields and the moon bled red through the haze, Josiah saw something no child should ever have to see: his mother, Mary, in the cabin, surrounded by 5 men who did not come for love, but for sport. What happened next would stain the very land they walked on. For Josiah did not cry. He did not scream. He watched. He remembered. And then he began to plan. The summer of 1849 had been a cruel one on the Lockridge plantation. The river had overrun its banks twice, drowning half the cotton before harvest. The white men blamed the slaves, saying their lazy hands had cursed the season. The lash sang daily across the fields, and the smell of salt and sweat hung like fog. Josiah's mother, Mary, was one of the house slaves, quiet, graceful, and obedient when eyes were upon her. But when she thought no one watched, her shoulders sagged beneath years of work and silence. She had once been beautiful, the kind that made even the mistress of the house stiffen with jealousy. But beauty on a plantation was a curse, not a blessing. It was what caught the master's eye, what earned her soft words one night and bruises the next. Josiah had learned not to ask about those bruises. He only listened. He knew every creak in the floorboards of the big house, every hinge that moaned when the doors opened after dark. He also knew his mother's voice, the way it changed when fear sat in her throat. That night, the air was thick as molasses. The field hands had long since gone to their quarters, but Josiah could not sleep. He sat up in the small cot he shared with 2 younger boys, listening to the night insects sing. Then came the noise, a carriage wheel crunching over gravel, hushed laughter, boots on the steps of the big house. The laughter was cruel. Men's laughter. Josiah crept out, bare feet silent against the dirt. He slipped behind the smokehouse and crouched low, watching the windows of the main house glow faintly with lamplight. Through the thin boards, he saw shadows moving, one tall, 4 others behind him. The voices slurred with whiskey. Then he heard it: his mother's name. "Is greater than Mary," one said, dragging the word like honey off his tongue. "The mistress says you got the softest skin this side of the river. Let's see if she's right. It's not next to Hood Fru that prizes." The others laughed. The sound turned Josiah's blood to ice. He didn't understand all the words, but he understood the tone, the way the men's boots scraped closer, the way the laughter turned low. He wanted to move, to run in, to grab her hand, to scream, but his body wouldn't obey. He froze, watching the lamplight tremble. Then came the sound that would never leave him, a muffled cry, a scuffle, and then silence. Josiah pressed his hand over his mouth. His heart thundered in his ears so loud he thought the whole world could hear it. The night insects stopped singing. Even the river seemed to pause. It was only when one of the men shouted, "She's fainted, get her up," that Josiah snapped. He turned and ran, barefoot through the weeds, down toward the edge of the swamp. He fell to his knees in the mud, tears mixing with dirt. The moonlight rippled on the black water, cold and cruel. "God," he whispered. "Make 'em stop." No answer came, only the croak of frogs and the hiss of wind through the reeds. So Josiah made a different promise, one that would not wait for heaven's mercy. He wiped his face, stood, and whispered, "If they don't stop, I will." The next morning, the big house buzzed with rumors. One of the men, a young field boss named Calder, had been bitten by a snake on his way back to his quarters. His leg was swollen, the skin blackening by dawn. "Serves him right," one of the kitchen girls whispered when no one could hear. Josiah said nothing. But he saw the same snake later that day coiled near the well, its scales glistening. It didn't move when he passed. It only watched. That night, as the cicadas sang again, Josiah crept back toward the big house. His small hands carried a rusted knife, the kind used to cut tobacco leaves. He wasn't ready yet. Not tonight. But he wanted to see. To remember every door, every step, every creak. He found his mother sitting by the hearth, her face blank, her eyes dull. She didn't see him slip in. "Mama," he whispered. She flinched like a startled animal, then turned. When she saw his face, she pressed a trembling finger to her lips. "Don't speak of it, Josiah," she said. "Not ever." He swallowed hard. "They hurt you." Her eyes filled, but her voice stayed steady. "There are things you can't fight, child. You just live past them." He shook his head slowly. "I can fight." She touched his cheek, gentle, broken. "You're a boy. Don't turn yourself to hate." But Josiah was already gone inside. Something in him had cracked, something that would never heal the way she wanted it to. As he slipped back into the night, he looked toward the swamp again. The fireflies had gathered there, hundreds of them, pulsing like lanterns over the black water. And in their light, he thought he saw faces pale, waiting. Josiah nodded once, as if in answer. The swamp, silent for years, seemed to breathe. And from that night on, it would never sleep again. 3 days passed before Mary's bruises began to fade, but the marks on Josiah's mind only deepened. He moved through the days like a shadow, obeying every order in the field but hearing nothing, seeing nothing except the image of those men crowding the lamplight. The others thought grief had made him quiet. They did not know he was listening, learning. At night he went to the swamp. The grown-ups avoided it, calling it cursed, but Josiah found peace there. The trees leaned over the water like old guardians, and fireflies floated above the reeds. He spoke to them as if they were spirits. "You saw," he whispered. "You remember." The swamp listened. One evening, while the sun melted into the tree line, he found old Ben, the plantation's trapper, setting snares for muskrats. Ben was half blind, half drunk, and entirely forgotten by the white folks. Josiah helped him carry his nets in exchange for stories, tales of herbs that burned like acid, roots that put men to sleep, and mud that hid every trace of a body. "You watch careful, boy," Ben warned one night, his eyes milky in the firelight. "Knowledge cuts both ways. You use it wrong, it'll cut you too." Josiah only nodded. He already knew there were things worse than being cut. The first of the 5 was easy to find. Calder, the overseer's nephew, the one who had mocked Mary loudest. His snake-bitten leg still hadn't healed, and the doctor said rot was setting in. The slaves whispered it was God's justice. Josiah knew better. He had watched Calder stumble drunk toward the marsh one evening, pistol on his hip to relieve himself. He followed, silent as fog. The man never saw him. All it took was a handful of crushed nightshade leaves, something Ben had shown him, and the open sore on Calder's calf. By morning, the infection spread. Calder's fevered screams echoed through the yard for 2 days before he died, skin black as tar. The master buried him by the cornfield, muttering about curses. Josiah stared from the shadows and felt nothing. 1 down, 4 to go. Mary grew thinner after that. She moved through her chores with the calm of someone who had forgotten what peace felt like. Sometimes, she caught Josiah watching her and forced a smile. "You keep your head low, son," she whispered once. "The Lord's watching." But Josiah had stopped believing in that Lord. The swamp was his church now. At night he carved small marks into a tree near the water, 5 lines at first, then 1 crossed out. It wasn't a list, it was a promise. Each mark bled sap that glowed under the moonlight. The second man was Harlan Pierce, one of the traders who came to Lockridge to buy cotton and women alike. He liked to stay late, drinking and boasting about his deals. Josiah watched him for days, learning his habits. Harlan loved honey, spread it on biscuits, stirred it into his whiskey. One night, when the kitchen was empty, Josiah slipped a spoonful of crushed glass from a broken lantern into the honey jar. Harlan left 2 mornings later, laughing, oblivious. By the time he reached the ferry crossing, the tiny shards had done their work. His belly swelled, and blood painted the road behind his wagon. The slaves in the field said a storm was coming. Josiah just looked at the sky and whispered, "Two." But revenge doesn't come without noise. The mistress of the house, Eveline Lockridge, felt the air shift. She noticed Josiah's silence, the way his eyes followed men rather than the ground. "That boy gives me chills," she told her husband. "He looks at people like he's counting their sins." The master laughed. "He's just a child." Even Mary sensed it. She caught Josiah cleaning his hands by the well one night, dark stains swirling down the water. "What did you do?" she demanded. He met her eyes. "I made it right." She slapped him once, hard. "You'll damn us both." Josiah touched his cheek but didn't answer. The swamp hummed behind him, patient. Weeks later, another face joined his list. Deputy Rawls, a visitor from the neighboring county, one of the 5. He came often to collect debts and lingered for Mary's cooking. One afternoon, he sat on the porch with his coffee, boots stretched, pistol beside him. Josiah brought water as ordered. "Fine boy," Rawls said, ruffling his hair with the same hand that had hurt Mary. "You look just like her." Josiah smiled faintly. "Yes, sir." That night, he waited until the deputy slept in the guest quarters. Then he took the small sack Ben had given him a powder ground from swamp mushrooms. A breath of it was enough to make a man dream strange things. Too much stopped the breath entirely. Josiah sprinkled it in Rawls's flask. In the morning, the deputy was found on the porch, eyes open, mouth full of foam. The master blamed bad whiskey. Josiah made another mark on the tree. After that, fear spread through Lockridge like fever. The mistress forbade any of the house slaves from leaving after dark. She hung charms by the doors, muttering prayers. But every night Josiah still slipped out, moving between shadows and cypress trunks. The swamp whispered now soft voices, not cruel ones. Sometimes he thought he saw shapes in the mist, figures bent and faceless, watching him. He wasn't afraid. He felt them nod when he passed. By autumn, only 2 remained, Mr. Lockridge himself and his cousin Tobias, the overseer. They had been the first and last that night in Mary's cabin. Josiah saved them for the end. One evening, Tobias caught him near the tool shed. "What are you doing, boy?" he barked. "Looking for my mama," Josiah said. "She's gone to the mistress," Tobias sneered. "You best stay clear of her tonight." The words chilled him. He remembered another night, another visit. Something inside him snapped. He lifted his eyes, and for the first time, the overseer saw hatred older than his years. That night, the swamp wind rose high enough to shake the trees. Josiah knelt by his carved marks. Only 2 remained uncut. He drew his knife and pressed it into the bark until sap ran down like tears. "I swear," he whispered, "by this earth, by this water, by every breath she lost before the harvest ends, you'll join them." Lightning split the sky. The air smelled of iron and rain. Somewhere in the big house, a woman screamed. At dawn, smoke rose over Lockridge. The barn was burning. The slaves gathered, shouting, but the master and Tobias were nowhere to be found. Only Mary stood on the porch, clutching Josiah's hand. Her eyes were wide, half terrified, half knowing. "What did you do?" she breathed. Josiah looked toward the swamp, where fireflies still glimmered through the smoke. "Nothing," he said quietly. "The land did it." And from the trees came the low rustle of wind like applause from something ancient, satisfied, and waiting for the next name. The Lockridge barn burned through the night, flames twisting into the clouds like a prayer turned wrong. By morning, only a black skeleton remained, beams cracked open, animals charred where they'd been tied. The smell of smoke clung to everything, thick and bitter as grief. Master Lockridge and his cousin Tobias were gone. The plantation searched for 2 days. Men rode out on horses, dogs sniffed the woods, and even the slaves were ordered into the swamp to look for signs. They found nothing. No footprints, no bones. Only the barn's collapsed doorway, where the earth looked freshly turned as if something beneath had breathed and shifted during the fire. When the master's wife, Eveline Lockridge, stood by those ashes, she pressed a handkerchief to her mouth. "It's the boy," she whispered. "It's that boy, and his witch of a mother." But Mary said nothing. She stood near the well with her hands clasped tight, her son beside her, both of them still covered in soot. Josiah's face gave nothing away. He stared at the smoking ruin like a man watching a storm recede. That afternoon, the sheriff came a red-faced man with too much pride and too little sense. He questioned everyone, but none of the slaves spoke. Fear sealed their tongues. When he turned to Josiah, he sneered. "You were seen near the barn before sundown," he said. Josiah shrugged. "Fed the horses like I was told." And after that, he met the man's eyes, calm as still water, prayed. The sheriff spat and rode away, muttering that the devil had taken up residence at Lockridge. For the first time in years, the fields went quiet. No one sang. No one laughed. The new overseer, a nervous man from Georgia, kept his whip coiled. He didn't want to test whatever had taken the last one. At night, the swamp whispered louder. Josiah heard it through his window, a low, constant hum like the breath of the world itself. Sometimes it said his name. Sometimes it said his mother's. Mary begged him to stay inside after dark. "Please, son," she said. "The Lord may have turned his face from this place, but you don't need to follow him into the dark." Josiah looked at her and said softly, "The dark listens better than he ever did." She slapped him again, then drew him into her arms, sobbing, "I don't want to lose you too." He held her tightly, but his eyes stared past her shoulder, toward the tree line where the swamp waited. A week later, Eveline Lockridge moved into her husband's office to manage the books. The widow wore mourning black, though her grief was stiff and cold. She refused to sell the plantation, insisting her husband would return. "He'll walk out of that swamp one morning," she said. "He always finds his way home." Some nights, she left a lantern burning by the back porch for him. Other nights, the slaves swore they saw her pacing with a pistol in hand, muttering to shadows. Then came the scratching. It started quiet, small noises against the shutters, like branches in the wind. But soon, it grew sharper, closer. On the third night, the cook found claw marks on the pantry door. The dogs refused to go near the swamp's edge, tails between their legs, whimpering at things unseen. Eveline ordered a fence built along the boundary, but every morning the posts were ripped from the ground, the nails twisted as if by giant hands. The land was changing. Josiah began to dream again, not of the fire, not of death, but of the water. In the dreams, the swamp was alive, pulsing like a heartbeat. He saw figures moving beneath its surface, faces he knew. Tobias, the master. Their eyes open, mouths filled with mud, whispering to him through bubbles of air. "Finish it," they said. "The line's not ended yet." He woke each morning drenched in sweat, his hands shaking. His mother saw the fear but misunderstood it. "You're haunted," she said. "You brought something back from the fire." Josiah turned away. Maybe it was never gone. It was near harvest when Eveline finally broke. One afternoon, she summoned Mary to the house. "They say your boy walks in the swamp after sundown," she said, eyes sharp as knives. "Is it true?" Mary hesitated. "He prays out there." "Prays to what?" Mary bit her lip. "To what listens." Eveline laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Then perhaps it will listen to me." That night, she followed Josiah into the swamp with a lantern and a pistol. She thought she was hunting him. She did not understand she was walking into something far older than revenge. Josiah heard her before he saw her boots crunching reeds, glass clinking in her trembling hand. "Boy," she called, "come out." He stepped from the mist, silent, eyes glowing in the lantern light. She lifted the pistol. "You'll tell me what you've done with my husband," she shouted. "You'll tell me now." He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded toward the water. "He's home." Eveline's hand shook. "You little—" The ground gave way beneath her. The mud bubbled and rose like boiling tar. She screamed as the earth swallowed her up to the waist, dragging her down. The lantern fell, shattering, fire flickering over the dark surface. For a moment, Josiah saw the faces again. Lockridge, Tobias, Calder reaching for her, pulling her under. He did not move. The swamp closed over her with a sound like a sigh. By dawn, only her black veil floated on the surface. Josiah retrieved it and laid it on the shore. When the sun rose, it dried into ashes. Mary found him there hours later, staring at the still water. "Tell me it's done," she begged. He looked at her with hollow eyes. "It'll never be done." That night, thunder rolled over Lockridge, and rain fell heavy enough to drown the fields. By morning, the swamp had spread, inching closer to the house, swallowing fences and paths, erasing every trace of what once stood. The land had claimed what was owed. The slaves whispered that the Lockridge curse had begun, that the soil itself was angry, that the swamp had a new guardian. They said if you went out there after midnight, you'd see a boy kneeling by the water, whispering to the ghosts of those who wronged him. Some said he was praying. Others said he was teaching the earth new names. And though no one dared to ask Mary the truth, they noticed she never left the house again. She just rocked in her chair, staring toward the swamp, waiting for a sound only she could hear, the faint, steady rhythm of her son's whisper, and the swamp answering back. The Lockridge plantation stood half swallowed by earth now. By the turn of autumn, the swamp had crept up to the back steps of the big house, sucking at the foundation like a hungry beast. Cypress roots jutted through the ground like crooked fingers. The well had turned black, its water thick and bitter. No one dared drink from it. The overseer left without a word one night, his horse screaming as it vanished into the mist. No one replaced him. The slaves tended what little they could, but it was clear the land no longer answered to man. Inside the house, Mary Lockridge, as some still called her, though she'd never worn the name, rarely spoke. She stayed near the parlor window, watching the swamp inch closer each day. "God's taken it all back," she whispered once to the maid who brought her food. "All the blood, all the names. The ground's tired of remembering." The maid didn't come back after that. Only Josiah still moved freely between the fields and the water. He was older now, not by years, but by something heavier. His eyes were the color of ash. He no longer flinched when thunder cracked, nor crossed himself when lightning struck. He would spend hours by the water's edge, tracing lines in the mud, whispering words that weren't from any book. The others called him the boy who talks to the dead. One evening, as dusk fell thick and red, Josiah returned to the house with something wrapped in a cloth. Mary looked up from her chair. "What have you got there, child?" He set it on the table gently. When he unfolded it, the stench of rot filled the room. Inside lay a rusted locket, the one Eveline Lockridge had worn around her neck, engraved with her husband's initials. Mary recoiled. "Lord have mercy." "She gave it back," Josiah said simply. Mary's hand trembled as she reached for it, then drew away. "You shouldn't keep that." "She wanted me to," he said, his voice calm, distant. "Said she was sorry." Mary's lip quivered. "The dead don't speak, Josiah." He turned toward her then, and in the glow of the dying fire, she saw the truth. His mouth wasn't moving when she heard the words. The ones buried wrong do. That night, she dreamt of the swamp again, but this time, it had eyes. Dozens of them, blinking up through the muck, and every one bore the same gray color as her son's. When she woke, Josiah was gone. He walked into the swamp barefoot, carrying the locket and a candle stub. The mist was thick, clinging to him like breath. "Show me," he whispered, his voice steady. "If there's more to bury, I'll do it." The water rippled, slow and wide. Then the shapes rose pale, familiar faces, half-eaten by time. Lockridge, Tobias, Eveline. Others, too, men who had whipped, laughed, and taken what they wanted. Each of them bound to the muck, mouths open in silent pleading. Josiah knelt, the candle trembling in his hand. "You want peace? Then give me truth." The faces turned upward, and from their throats came a low sound, a moan that vibrated through the ground. Mud bubbled, bones surfaced, and beneath them something glimmered. Chains, dozens of them, tangled and buried deep. The remnants of those who had died building the fields. The swamp had remembered them all. Josiah pressed his hand to the water. "I'll free you," he said. "Every one, The water surged, a wave of black muck swallowing his legs, his chest, his arms. But he did not struggle. He sank willingly, clutching the locket tight. The last thing he saw before the mud closed over him was the faint glow of the candle burning underwater, unyielding. By morning, he was gone. Mary searched for him until her feet bled, calling his name until her voice broke. She found the candle stub wedged between the roots of an old cypress tree, still warm. She fell to her knees and wept until the sun rose high. That night, the wind carried strange sounds again, not screams, not songs, but the low hum of a lullaby. It came from the water, and every slave who heard it stopped and listened. Some said it was Josiah's voice. Others said it was the swamp itself, singing to the souls it had finally claimed. Weeks passed. The plantation died. The crops rotted where they stood, and the house sank inch by inch into the mud. Mary stopped eating, her eyes hollowed, her body grew frail, but she smiled when she heard the song. "He's still speaking," she'd whisper. "He's keeping watch." On the final night of her life, a thunderstorm rolled through black and endless. The wind howled through the broken windows, and the water rose to the porch. She could hear him again, closer this time. "Ma," it said, clear as daylight. She turned her head toward the door, tears on her cheeks. "I'm coming, baby." When the lightning struck, the house burned from the inside out, not in flames, but in light, like the swamp had opened its mouth to swallow it whole. By dawn, nothing remained but the chimney and the whisper of her name in the reeds. Years later, travelers passing through the old Lockridge land told stories. They said at dusk, when the air turned heavy, you could see a woman in white walking the waterline, her feet never sinking. She carried a locket and sang to the mist. And if you listened close enough, you'd hear a boy's voice answering her soft, low, eternal. They said the swamp had learned their names, and it never forgot. Decades passed, but the Lockridge plantation remained untouched. The swamp took what it wanted, walls, fences, the bones of the barn, and left behind only whispers. Those who rode by the old road swore the mist was thicker there, the air colder, the silence heavier than any churchyard. By the year 1892, the land was known simply as the Widow's Sink. No one remembered who the widow had been, only that her house had gone down screaming in a storm of light. Locals said it was cursed, that if you set foot on the old road after sundown, you'd hear the sound of chains dragging through water, slow, steady, never stopping. But the curse did not keep everyone away. Greed, after all, has no fear. A man named Ellis Granger came first, a speculator from Savannah, sharp-dressed and sharp-tongued, who saw profit where others saw ghosts. He bought the property cheap, boasting that he'd drain the swamp and raise a new cotton empire. The townsfolk tried to warn him. One old preacher told him, "That ground's fed on more than rainwater." Ellis laughed and said, "Then it'll grow rich crops, if we'd." He arrived with laborers and dynamite. The men worked 3 days before one of them vanished. Then another. They found the first man's hat near the creek, torn clean in half. The second man's boots were discovered miles away, filled with mud that shimmered like oil. Ellis told the survivors it was nonsense. Snakes and stories, he called it. But when night fell, the swamp began to hum. It started as a low vibration, like wind through reeds. Then it deepened, turned rhythmic, almost human, a lullaby, slow and old, the same one Josiah used to hum. Ellis couldn't sleep that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw faces under the water, pale and still, watching him. By morning, he packed his things and left. He never spoke of what he'd seen, but those who met him later said his hair had turned white overnight. Years rolled into decades. The swamp kept its silence, though some nights, people said they saw lantern light moving among the cypress trees, never steady, always swaying, as if carried by invisible hands. Children told stories around fires. They said a boy and his mother guarded the land, that the swamp itself listened to them, protecting them from trespassers. "Say their names with respect," the elders warned, "and don't ever whistle past the creek." But memory fades, and the new generation had little use for old ghosts. In the spring of 1921, The state sent surveyors to mark the property for a new road. Among them was a young man named Henry Lockridge, a name no one connected to the curse until it was too late. He was proud of his lineage, though he never knew its stain. When his partner warned him about the stories, he grinned. Can't haunt what's already forgotten. They set up camp near the edge of the swamp. That night, Henry couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. His partner snored beside the fire, but the wind carried strange murmurs like the echo of a woman's voice, singing low. He followed the sound to the water's edge. The moon shone white through the mist, and there, between the cypress roots, stood two shapes, a woman in white and a small boy beside her. The woman's hair drifted like smoke. The boy's eyes glowed faintly silver. Henry froze. The woman raised her hand, palm open not in warning, but in recognition. "You carry his name," she said softly. He stumbled backward. Who are you?" "The one your blood forgot," she answered. "And the one who remembered." The boy looked up at her, then at him. "He doesn't know," he said simply. He wasn't told. The swamp rippled around their feet, the trees groaned, and then the woman's voice changed colder, older. The line began with a sin buried in this mud. It ends when it's faced. Henry's chest tightened. "What sin?" "5 men," said the boy. "1 woman, and a child who saw." Henry dropped to his knees. "Josiah," he whispered. The name had come from nowhere, yet it felt carved in his bones. The woman smiled, a sad, breaking thing. "You've said it. That's all we ever wanted." Then the mist swallowed them whole. By dawn, Henry was gone. The campfire was cold. His footprints led straight into the swamp, and near the edge, his partner found something half buried, a silver locket engraved with the initials E.L. No one ever reclaimed the land again. The state rerouted the road. Today, the old Lockridge ground lies beneath water and moss. The cypress trees still stand like sentinels, their roots gripping secrets the earth refuses to release. Hunters who pass through on foggy mornings claim to hear humming from nowhere, a woman's tune joined by a boy's soft voice. And when they leave, some say the mud clings to their boots too long, like it's trying to remember who they are. Sometimes, on the anniversary of the fire, a faint light glows at the center of the swamp. Some say it's gas. Others say it's the candle Josiah carried that night, still burning, still guiding lost souls to rest. But the elders in Charleston whisper a different story. They say the swamp doesn't forget. It watches, waits, and hums to itself, not in malice, but in memory. Because some sins sink deep enough that even heaven refuses to touch them. And when the wind blows through the reeds, if you listen close, you can still hear it. A mother's lullaby, a boy's answering voice, and the sound of peace earned through pain. The swamp never gave them back. It simply learned to sing with them. By the middle of the 20th century, the Lockridge plantation existed only in courthouse records and whispered tales. The swamp had swallowed nearly everything: fields, chimneys, fences, even the iron gate that once bore the family crest. Locals called the place Ghostwater Hollow now. They didn't remember the Lockridges, or Josiah, or the horrors that had once soaked the soil, but they remembered the song. A few times a year, usually in late summer when the air hung heavy and the insects went silent, someone near the hollow would swear they heard it, a slow hum drifting across the dark water. Old-timers would shake their heads and mutter, "The mother's tune again." Children would dare each other to follow it, but none ever returned without shaking hands and hollow eyes. The world moved on. Cars replaced horses, concrete replaced cobblestone, and Charleston's new generation learned history through textbooks that skipped entire truths. The Lockridge name vanished, erased by shame and silence. But history has a way of calling itself back. In 1971, a young historian named Clara Jennings came to Charleston University to write her dissertation on forgotten Southern estates. She stumbled on a deed labeled Lockridge Property, 1,839, 1,865. There were scorch marks along the edges of the paper. The clerk who handed it to her said softly, "I wouldn't go digging there, miss. That land's got a memory." Clara smiled. "That's exactly why I'm going." She reached Ghostwater Hollow on a gray morning in October. The road ended miles before the map said it should. Trees leaned inward like watchers, and fog curled through the air in thick ribbons. She parked by the old creek bed and began walking, taking photographs and notes. Beneath the cypress, she found remnants of brick and iron half buried in moss. Her flashlight caught something glinting, a corner of metal, delicate and curved. She dug it free. A silver locket. Inside, the initials E.L. still shimmered faintly beneath the grime. Clara's pulse quickened. She didn't know the story yet, but she felt its weight. As she stood, the wind died completely. The air turned dense, like the swamp itself was holding its breath. Then came the sound, faint but distinct, the hum of a woman's voice. She froze, scanning the trees. "Hello?" she called. The voice didn't answer, only softened into a lullaby. Slow, sorrowful, familiar though she had never heard it before. Something in her chest ached. She felt the air thicken around her, pressing gently, almost tenderly, against her heart. The melody faded. But when she turned to leave, she saw footprints beside her own, small, bare, and wet. That night in her rented cabin, Clara transcribed her notes with trembling fingers. She couldn't stop humming the tune. It haunted her dreams. A boy's face half lit by firelight, a woman reaching through smoke, the echo of chains turning to roots beneath water. She began researching obsessively, archives, oral histories, slave records. The pieces fell together slowly, painfully. The Lockridge plantation, its mistress, the unnamed woman who vanished, the boy who disappeared. In the Charleston Courier from 1856, she found a short paragraph. Is greater than, a slave woman and her child were reported missing after the great fire that consumed the Lockridge estate. It is assumed they perished in the blaze. No names, no follow-up. She added 2 names in her notebook herself, Josiah and Alara. Weeks later, Clara returned to the swamp with a tape recorder. The first hour yielded nothing but frogs and wind. But as the sun dipped, the air changed again. The stillness returned. Her recorder began to hum. At first, she thought it was interference. Then she realized it was the same melody she'd heard before, clearer now, closer, a woman's voice and a boy's, humming in harmony. Her eyes filled with tears. "I hear you," she whispered. "I remember you." A ripple crossed the water. For a moment, she saw them, faint outlines in the mist. The woman in white, the boy by her side, their faces calm. No accusation, no anger, only release. Then the sound faded, and the swamp fell silent again. When Clara played the tape back later, the humming was gone. But at the very end, she heard something else, a man's voice, soft, old, full of relief. Is greater than, it's done now. Clara published her dissertation 2 years later under a new title, The Forgotten Voices of Lockridge Hollow. The academic world praised her research, but few believed her descriptions of the unexplainable phenomena. They dismissed them as folklore, embellishment, romanticism. Clara didn't argue. She knew what she'd heard. She returned to the hollow one last time before leaving Charleston. The swamp was quiet, peaceful almost. Dragonflies skimmed the surface of the water where the old house once stood. She set the locket on a patch of moss and whispered, "Rest now." For the first time, the wind felt warm. Decades later, children in Charleston still whisper about the singing swamp. They say a mother and her boy hum to each other across the water, keeping watch so no cruelty ever roots there again. Some say that if you come with anger in your heart, the mud will swallow your footsteps. But if you come in peace, the swamp will hum softly, welcoming you. The Lockridge name never returned to the land. The earth forgot it, or perhaps forgave it, but the song remains. It's not a song of vengeance anymore, but of remembrance. A promise whispered through the reeds that pain will not be buried, that love, even broken, beaten, and burned, will always find its echo. And on still nights, if you stand by the cypress and close your eyes, you might hear it too, the faint harmony of a mother and her son, their voices blending with the sigh of the water. A melody older than forgiveness, softer than sorrow, endless as the swamp itself. The song beneath the water, 50 years after Clara Jennings vanished from Charleston's academic circle, the university library prepared to renovate its archives. The dust smelled like old paper and salt water, as though the ghost of the coast itself lived in the walls. Among the forgotten boxes marked Misk. Lockridge was a plain envelope sealed with wax. Across the front, written in careful script, were 3 words: "For whoever listens." The archivist who found it, a young man named Aaron Price, was only in his first year on the job. He'd never heard of Clara Jennings or the Lockridge plantation, but something about that phrase, "whoever listens," caught at him like a hook beneath the ribs. He opened it carefully. Inside were 2 things: a thin notebook wrapped in oilcloth and a small reel of magnetic tape labeled Field Recording #7. Hollow Creek, October 14, 1973. Aaron frowned. The tape was old, fragile. He logged it in, took it to the media room, and threaded it through an ancient player. When he pressed play, static filled the air. Then a woman's voice emerged, calm, Southern, a little tired. "Is greater than, this is Clara Jennings. I'm standing in what used to be Lockridge Hollow. The air is heavy tonight. The frogs have gone silent. I can't explain why, but it feels like someone's listening." A long pause, only wind. Then faint, rising through the hum of the machine, a melody. Low, slow, a lullaby. Aaron felt every hair on his neck stand up. He leaned closer. The voice was unmistakably human, but layered a woman's hum, then a child's, weaving together like twin threads. The tape wavered, the pitch bending as if the sound came from underwater. "Is greater than, it's beautiful," Clara whispered. "They're still here." Then came the static again. For a moment, it seemed finished until the faintest echo returned. A man's voice in the distance saying, "It's done now." Aaron froze the tape, rewound, played the phrase again. But the second time, the voice was gone. He opened the notebook next. The first page contained a sketch of the old Lockridge estate drawn in a careful, almost reverent hand. Beneath it, Clara had written, "Is greater than, the truth doesn't always stay buried. Sometimes it hums." The entries that followed blended academic observation with something stranger. Dreams, descriptions of fog that glowed faintly blue, mentions of the woman by the water, and notes on sound frequencies measured by her recorder that do not match any known natural source. In quote, Aaron read for hours, barely blinking. Each page seemed to breathe, the handwriting changing as the notes grew more frantic, ink darker, lines trembling. The final entry stopped mid-sentence. "Is greater than, they've begun to sing to me directly now, not just through the..." The line ended there, as though the pen had slipped away mid-word. The next morning, Aaron brought the notebook and tape to the department head. Professor Linnea Ward, a stoic woman with 30 years of tenure, barely glanced at them. "Urban myth," she said. "We've heard versions of it for decades. Every city in the South has its ghost swamp. File it under folklore." "But the tape," Aaron began. She waved him off. "Technology degrades, sounds distort. Don't let ghost stories eat your career." He nodded politely. But that night, he couldn't sleep. The lullaby lingered in his head, faint as breath. It followed him home, curling behind his thoughts. At midnight, he found himself driving no destination in mind, only a pull. The highway blurred past until he saw the old wooden sign nearly swallowed by ivy. "Ghostwater Hollow, keep out." The air thickened the moment he stepped out of the car. The swamp stretched before him, calm and moonlit. He walked until the ground turned soft beneath his shoes, until the frogs fell silent. Then, just as Clara had described, came the hum. 2 voices, perfectly in tune. He closed his eyes. The melody filled him, not frightening but impossibly sad. He saw flashes, a mother clutching her child, a house aflame, a boy's tear-streaked face staring into darkness. He whispered, "I hear you," and just like that, the sound stopped. When he opened his eyes, the surface of the swamp rippled once, and a faint glimmer appeared, something silver resting in the shallows. He reached for it. It was a locket, the initials E.L. Aaron returned the next morning to the library. soaked and pale but smiling faintly. He placed the locket on top of Clara's notebook. He didn't tell anyone what happened, only labeled the box. Lockridge Collection, restricted access. Months later, a student cataloging audio history found the tape and listened out of curiosity. She swore she heard not two, but three voices humming this time. The woman, the child, and a third, faint but distinct. A man's hum that carried warmth instead of sorrow. When she told Aaron, he only smiled and said, "Then maybe they're finally together." Today, that tape sits in a temperature-controlled vault, its contents digitized but not public. Yet those who've heard it all report the same strange feeling, a calm sadness, a pressure behind the eyes, a fleeting scent of rain on burned wood. The story of the Lockridge Hollow remains officially classified as legend, but some nights, when the humidity rises and the air goes still, the janitors on the bottom floor of the library swear they hear humming through the vents. A soft, wordless tune, a mother's lullaby, a promise that the forgotten will always be remembered. And somewhere in the silence between notes, a whisper lingers Clara's voice, patient, gentle, echoing through the years, is greater than for whoever listens.